Welcome to another episode of African Policy Heroes Unveiled, where young African leaders share their inspirational stories. My name is Apiwe Hotele from South Africa. I'm a young African leader at the Florence School of Transnational Governance. Today, I have a very, very special guest, a dear friend of mine, an advocate of gender and good governance, a change maker, an activist, Leah Tesfamariam. Welcome, Mama.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you today?
Better than yesterday.
That's always a good thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be here with you, my friend, and to share this moment. I'm really proud of you. I say that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Oh. So can you briefly tell our viewers about yourself?
So I consider myself an activist. I'm a change maker, and most importantly, I'm a Pan-Africanist. At STG, a Young African Leaders Fellow. My career interest is in international development, so I believe in economic and political advancement of rights. I also believe in the elimination of poverty, injustice, and discrimination. My motto in life, I always like to lead with my motto in life. My motto in life is that hope is not a strategy and neither is crying a remedy. So in many ways, this propels me in everything that I do personally and professionally, and especially in a career of international development, you encounter so many challenges because the world is currently facing a lot of challenges.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we don't have the capacity or the collective effort to solve them. So, and believing in this motto, it keeps me going, and to have more hope that we have as a continent, as a people, we need to be working towards a solution.
Awesome. Yeah. Hope is definitely something we need to live by, 100%. So we have a lot of things in common, and I think one that I'm going to highlight right now is feminism. Going back in time, who would you say is that one person, your hero or heroine, someone that shaped you to be the person that you are today, that contributed to the person that you are today?
I openly declare that I'm a feminist, and I feel like some people receive it a different way, especially in the continent, and
Absolutely.
in certain spaces that I work in, it's almost a taboo to say it. So I take pride in saying that I'm a feminist. And I celebrate every woman. I feel like every woman, politically, economically, or socially, goes through some sort of adversary in their life, living in a male-dominated world. So in saying that, I celebrate every woman. But for me, the person who directly I get direct impact from or inspiration in being a feminist is my mother. I think if I look at my mother's journey, in many ways she took a very passive role in our lives, and this is because of the cultural norms.
Yeah.
And if there are many things that I celebrate about my mom, is her selflessness, her tenacity, her resilience, and her love for the family. And I think growing up, we didn't see it because my dad was very prominent in the decisions we make and very dominant. So in many ways, she was kind of in the background,
Yeah.
you know. But as I was growing up, and we started to share more, and I started to listen to him, and I became aware of a woman in their world. I look at the sacrifice that she made. You know, she was a total orphan in Eritrea. She was raised by her elder brother in a situation that was deeply patriarchal, you know, and they lived in extreme poverty. Because of the political instability in the country, she had to move as a refugee in Khartoum. There she got into an arranged marriage that was arranged by her brother. Then again they had to move to Kenya, and this is the life of a refugee. You keep on moving to Kenya, and in an abusive marriage. So basically she was removed from her social network. She couldn't go anywhere. She didn't have control of her life in many ways. And then for her to now raise us four kids, you know, through education. And she always says that as much as she herself didn't get a Western formal education, she's always proud that her kids were able to get good education. So in many ways, I celebrate her. And now that she's become a widow, and I see her kind of come into her own self in controlling her life and taking more decisions about her life and what she does, it's nice to see her blossom. So unfortunately, it's not nice that I've become a feminist out of a story of tragedy, but in many ways, it's what made me a feminist.
Absolutely. I'm actually getting emotional as I listen to your story, because it's actually a story that that is in common. It's quite common within the African continent, and I can certainly relate to it. Do you have a specific example of a decision that your mom made, or particular values about her that stood out, that shaped the kind of leader that you are today?
So at some point, and again, it's because I had one parent who was very dominant, and I grew up very close to my dad. So maybe in many ways, I didn't see the struggles that my mom was going through. But at some point, she was the breadwinner, and we were not aware about it. You know, and yes, she was a breadwinner, and we went to a private school, which was very expensive, the four of us. And at this time, my dad had was in transport business, and he decided to stop his business because it was very risky and there was a lot of accidents. So as he was waiting to now build our home, he had to take a break. So my mom was the one who was the breadwinner. I think in many ways, today when it gave me a picture of what a woman can do. Because I feel like most women, when you don't have a vision of what a woman can do, what's the word I'm looking for? So basically, my independence, my drive, my need to lead my own life and be proactive is seeing her coming out of the kind of background she came out from, where women didn't have any roles out of the home, to her being a refugee woman and being the breadwinner for our family. That for me was huge. It was, yeah.
Awesome. Mama, I want us to double tap on feminism, because I feel like a lot of the times the term feminism, number one, is misunderstood a lot. So what would you say feminism means to you, or how would you define feminism?
For me, the bottom line is choice. It's not, and unfortunately, how it's seen for us, for most of the African, in our continent, it's something negative. But I feel like people have not had the discussion of what actually feminism means. And it's really just choice. If today I decide that, okay, I would like to be in a partnership, I should be allowed to live in an environment that doesn't make me feel like there's something wrong with me. If today I decide that I would like to have a child or not, that is choice for me. If today I want to have more control over my reproductive health, and I want to say, you know what, it's not time for me I'm not ready to have a child, you know, it's just choice. So I feel like if that's how feminism is sold to the continent, more people would understand, as opposed to, oh, I don't want to be married, you know, I don't want to do domestic work. I think that's a trivial way to look at what feminism is.
Absolutely.
For me, the bottom line is just choice and control over my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So women have a choice to make whatever decisions they want for the benefit of their own lives, which I think is quite critical. Awesome. So you are in a very volatile field, if I can put it like that, which changes from time to time. You interact with different people every single day. What would you say are the key leadership skills in this particular field that are quite critical for people to take note of?
I generally feel like this is the time that is the hardest to be a leader, you know, because as opposed to before, where problems were seen in a linear way, where if you were either in climate, if your particular issue, for instance, you're working in human rights, it's seen like a silo. So you're working on human rights. If you're working on health, it's seen as you're working on health. But now problems have become so intertwined, you know, and there are experts who say it's a time of like a polycrisis, or some would say there is a world of wicked problems. So as a leader now, you have to be humble, and like vulnerability, you have to lead with vulnerability. Because if I said my focus is, I specialize in energy, it's not enough to be a leader in energy. You have to understand that, okay, for you to provide energy sources, it affects another aspect of people's lives. So for me, I think as a leader, it's the hardest time to be a leader, but it's at times like this shape who a best leader is, because then you're able to understand problems, you know, you're able to listen and to understand people. But I think most importantly, and in many ways, this is where I think we'll fall short as when it comes to African leaders, is the humility. I think we still suffer in many ways from the big man syndrome that was there immediately after independence, where you are the leader, you make all the decisions, you know it all, be it all, you can make all the, you know everything. Of which it's not the case now, because you have to be vulnerable to admit that, okay, I might not be good at this, or I don't understand this. I need to work with people and include more people to be able to get more thoughts, and be open to dissenting voice. If this is how I see something, it's possibly seen a different way to someone else, So I think vulnerability is key. I also think that we need a leader who is visionary, because sometimes you are leading constituents, who don't know the future that is possible, because they're so consumed with their lives, they're consumed with their daily lives to feed their family, So you need a leader who has a vision, and almost messianic. I don't like to use the word messianic, but we are able to invoke influence in people to believe in something, But at the same time, in making people believe in something, you have to be very pragmatic. And in saying that, I'm selling you a future, but you have to work. Where can you make concessions? You have to think as a leader. I think I'm a very big fan of Henry Kissinger, and he's a very big proponent of being a pragmatic leader. Sometimes you have to lose, sometimes you're going to win, but you have to take a risk. So I think if you combine someone who has this influence and who's very visionary and pragmatism, I think this is a very good combination. Include on top of that, someone who is very vulnerable and very empathetic to people who are vulnerable and who are suffering in society.
Mama. It goes without saying that you've done really amazing in your career, and I think you're still going to continue doing quite a lot more. So what advice would you give to a young person who is watching this right now and would like to get involved in your field?
Two things. One is that it has to be out of passion. And like I said, I think for me, I come from an immigrant refugee family, and seeing my parents who are from Eritrean background living in Kenya, which is a totally new environment, far away from their social system, and seeing them making it, I think it's made me more empathetic to people suffering or to people who are vulnerable. And so it has to come from a place where you're very passionate, because there are days where there are things happening in the world and you think it's so obvious that, okay, how come people cannot make a decision? We are losing lives, people are suffering. How come leaders cannot make a decision? And you almost want to give up. Or sometimes you think, okay, something has to be done, but it's stuck in bureaucracy or politics, So sometimes you're like, okay, but human values come first. How come we cannot decide in even that, So if it's out of passion, it keeps you going, it keeps you the fuel of saying, you know what, it's small steps. It's small steps, you're getting there despite the hurdles, So it has to come out of passion. The other thing, I think, I went to diplomacy school. So from a very young age, I knew I want to be in the field of diplomacy, international development. But I was also not naive that I'm from Africa, where we are so removed from a lot of global problems. When the world is talking about nuclear power or non-proliferation and disarmament, I'm like, but I live in a country where people just want to feed themselves.
Exactly.
How do I compete with someone who is already living in Europe, who has more opportunities, who can go to very good schools? So I was very aware from a very young age. And I was also aware in terms of finances, I probably wouldn't be able to fund a lot of things. And with time, when you start to follow people who are already in the field, you start to hear, okay, this person has a foreign degree. This person went to school abroad. So in many ways, I'm like, where am I going to start? I know my parents cannot fund this, So it's a lot to do with positioning. So my whole life, I decided, okay, so this is what I want to do. I have to look for opportunities. I have to look for internships that would lead me to this field. So I was always on the lookout for scholarship opportunities. So I did my master's in public policy and good governance, and the funding was from a scholarship. When I did my diplomacy, when I went to diplomacy school in Poland, it was also through a scholarship. So it's always being aware that, okay, I have challenges, but how do I overcome it? And how do I find, me being in this fellowship in YALP, for instance, it's supposed to leverage me to, to be more competitive compared to my peers. So one is positioning, and two, it has to come from a place of passion, because there are days where you're like, we don't seem to be solving any problems, climate change is an existential threat, and we are not making, we cannot seem to find a collective decision. But those are the two.
I think positioning definitely is quite can be problematic depending on how you look at it. And I think double tapping exactly on positioning, what would you say is the role of, role models? Because especially within the African continent, looking at some of the dire situations that you face, what role do you think role models play in society?
I think they can speak to your spirit. to keep it, layman. They speak to your spirit. But most of it, they inspire you to a world that maybe is not familiar to you.
Yeah.
For instance, I feel like more than any other place in this world, I think you need mentors, or you need people to inspire you in Africa, and I think it inspires, especially amongst the youth, because if we are majority, you're at an age where you have so much energy, and you're like, okay, but there are not opportunities for me to be able to realize my potential or my opportunities. And then you have role models who give you a possibility in telling you that, there's hope. But it also inspires in us, like, that we can have innovation, as a continent, that it's possible to live for, like, good leadership. It's possible for us to go through a lot of things that in your current situation that you don't see in many ways. But I feel like we really need, because now as a continent we are being led by the strategic plan of Agenda 2063, and we want to shape a continent that we fully realize our potential, but it's mostly led by the African people, so in many ways it allows us to think that we can have agency in ourselves, and essentially we can lead Africa that we want, prosperous, reliant, I think more than ever we need people who can mentor us and inspire us. Yeah.
Awesome. And I guess then that speaks to us, as potential role models, being visible within our own communities and making sure that we continuously share hope and light as we continue.
It's almost like in you being who you are, you also are lifting other people.
Absolutely.
And it's a responsibility you carry on your shoulder. For instance, for me, if I think that, okay, fine, I'm an African, I'm also a woman, in many ways I cannot think of myself, because you are almost naturally born an activist. Because in being in spaces where people don't look like you, you are making a statement. Absolutely. And sometimes you don't want to make a statement, and sometimes you want to say something and just be myself as Leah, but people are like, you know what, that African girl said something. Yeah. So you almost always have to be on your toes, but in remembering that, okay, you're carrying African women on your shoulder, So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
As we show up as ourselves, we allow other people to show up as themselves,
Absolutely.
which I think is quite powerful. So in what ways would you say the Young African Leaders program has shaped your leadership?
First of all, I myself have gotten a lot of inspiration. I think yesterday we had Nadros, who is the new CEO of NEPAD. And then previously we had, I'm trying to remember her name, the lady who is the head of UN Women from South Africa.
Oh.
The two when we had the session on gender equality, we had two ladies.
Oh.
Yeah. So I mean,
why am I forgetting Mama?
Mfuzile or something like that.
Pumzile,
right. So I think, first of all, to see people who are from the continent and leading, like, international institutions, for me, it just tells me that it's possible. Absolutely. Particularly Nadros, who is Habesha, just like myself. So in many ways, if I see people from the continent who are making milestones in their careers, who are speaking with a voice that the world is listening, in many ways is inspirational. And for me, I think we do need people to inspire us. Otherwise, you're moving blindly in a world that they're not used to seeing someone like you. Secondly, I think the professional development skills I think are very critical in providing me an edge above my peers in many ways. We had a session, I think, on countering foreign information manipulation and interference. We had a session on how to write an op-ed on policy briefs, which are very, very critical in when you want to communicate a very complex ideas to decision makers or policy makers. So I think in this way, it's how to conduct effective advocacy. So these are skills, I'm going to use them, so these are hard skills that I can use. And thirdly, I think to be able to interact with other leaders in the continent, it makes you kind of feel like you're not alone. Yeah. It can seem sometimes when you're trying to bring change or be a change maker, you're like, okay, but it's like so no one can, right? Yeah, you really feel isolated, and like, can someone see what I'm the change I want to bring? Can someone understand that I want to see transformative change in the continent? But when you see all these young Africans, across the continent, it kind of also gives you a bit of hope. Lastly, and most importantly, I think I specialize in gender human rights, overall public policy and governance, but most of my work has been on women's rights. But now that the world is changing, and like I said, this word that people are using, the polycrisis or their wicked problems, you cannot thrive in the field when you're just good at one field or one policy field. So to be able to like address all these sustainability challenges, to have all discussions on health, on private sector and how private sector can bring development in Africa, it kind of gives you a big picture of the whole of all development issues.
Yeah.
So even when you're tackling one policy issue, you have an understanding of how it's interconnected. So in many ways, I think this is very important. There are days where I sit in class and I'm like, I understand nothing, and that's when for me I'm like, okay, it's time to, you have to know about it because it affects,
to read.
you know, So yeah.
Absolutely.
No, it's life-changing, it's transformative for me. And I mean, I've met you, so if I live with nothing, I've left with you.
Mama, thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming to today's session. Really appreciate you taking your time.
Yeah.
This brings us to the end of our session today. Please follow Leah on all social media platforms as she will continue to transform the African continent. Please, of course, like, follow, subscribe, comment on the STG YouTube page. Peace out.